Let me tell you, it was a day that'll be etched in my memory forever. It started off as any ordinary Saturday night dinner would. Emily, a sweet girl who often stayed with us on weekends, was sitting at the table with my daughter, Daisy. Emily's mom, Linda, worked long hours as a cab dispatcher, and Emily would spend Fridays and Saturdays at our house while her mom pulled those grueling 12-hour night shifts. Daisy and Emily had been inseparable ever since high school. Sleepovers were a regular thing for them, and while Susan, my ex-wife, was well acquainted with Linda, I'd never had the chance to meet her. Susan, in her usual way, assumed Linda might catch my eye, so she made sure our paths never crossed. At the time, I was neck-deep in work, trying to carve out a name in a crowded industry, which meant lots of travel. Susan was the one who handled the kids, and by Sunday mornings, a cab would swing by to pick Emily up. The girls always loved the little treats the drivers brought along. Emily enjoyed it, and Daisy did too. Anyway, that night, the night everything unraveled, started innocently enough. The four of us were sitting at the table, eating dinner, when Susan blindsided me. "James, I want a divorce. I'm leaving you," she announced, casual as if she were asking for a second helping of potatoes. When your wife of a decade says she's walking out, your mind just refuses to process it at first. It's surreal. She doubled down, saying, "I've found someone else, and I want to spend the rest of my life with him." Right there, with two 8-year-old girls sitting at the table, I had to keep it together. Somehow, I managed to stay composed, though I probably said something stupid like, "Fine, I'll start looking for an apartment tomorrow." Susan, always quick with a retort, shot back, "No, you'll need to keep the house. Daisy needs stability." That's when I stopped pretending to eat and just stared at her. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. She added, "Daniel and I are going on a trip around the world, and Daisy can't miss her schoolwork." "Are you kidding me?" I asked, louder than I intended. I was furious but kept a lid on it for the girl's sake. It was clear why she'd chosen this moment. She knew I wouldn't lose my temper in front of the kids. "I've always wanted to see the world while I'm still young enough to enjoy it," she said, not even looking up from her plate. The irony hit me like a truck. When we first met, I was the one who dreamed of traveling. I'd wanted to explore the Grand Canyon, hike the Rockies, visit Ayers Rock, and tour New Zealand after finishing my engineering degree. Susan, though, had insisted we have kids first, while she was young enough to enjoy them. Funny how that worked out. Daisy's birth hadn't gone as smoothly as Susan had hoped, and after that, she gave up on having more kids with barely a conversation. It seemed like taking care of a child wasn't as fun as she'd imagined. I couldn't sit there anymore. I got up, grabbed my shears, and headed for the garden to trim the roses. Snipping thorns felt better than yelling. After a while, I noticed the girls had joined me, quietly helping prune the bushes. "Careful, girls. You don't have gloves on," I warned. "We'll be fine, Dad," Daisy said. "What's your mom doing?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "She's upstairs packing," Daisy answered calmly, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. The rage simmered in me, but I didn't want to snap. I just kept trimming, wondering how any mother, especially my wife, could do this to her child. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I said to Daisy. "Why, Daddy? You didn't leave us." "Mom did," she replied with a clarity that stunned me. "Most kids at school have dads who leave. I'd rather stay with a dad who loves me than a mom who—" She trailed off, and I didn't press her, but those words stuck with me. Was I blind? Had I missed some sign? Susan always seemed like a loving mom. Yet there I was, in the garden with two girls working side by side on the same rose bush, while Susan packed upstairs, likely talking to her new man on the phone. "Ice cream," I announced suddenly. "Let's get the biggest ice cream sundaes we can find, girls." They cheered, and we headed out. At least for that moment, I could give them something sweet to enjoy. While they savored their treats, I tried to make sense of it all. Oddly enough, I wasn't heartbroken. The love I'd once felt for Susan evaporated with her declaration. My real concern was Daisy, making sure she was cared for and adjusting to this mess. Emily's mom, Linda, had enough on her plate, and I didn't want to add to it. But I knew I'd need help with Daisy's school pickups and vacations. I decided to call my sister, Mary, to explain the situation. When I told her, Mary exploded. She did what? She shouted. I kept the details sparse with the girls listening nearby. Susan ran off with some guy, I said flatly. Who is he? I don't know. Just some Casanova, I guess. His name is Daniel, Daisy piped up. And he's a library customer, Emily added helpfully. Susan had been working part-time at the library. I relayed this to Mary, but my focus was practical. The real issue is getting Daisy to and from school. I can handle mornings, but afternoons are impossible with my work hours. It's okay, Daddy, Daisy chimed in. Emily's mom will pick me up. That's not fair to her, I said. Oh, don't worry. We've got it all figured out, Daisy said confidently. Emily will stay here on weekends, and I'll stay with Emily and her mom during the week. Monday mornings were already looking different. Daisy, always thinking ahead, announced confidently, Dad, you can drive us to school, and Emily's mom will pick us up. The words hung in the air as I tried to process them. Before I could respond, Mary, still on the phone, chimed in. That sounds like a great plan, James. Have you talked to her about it yet? No, I admitted. I've never even met Emily's mom. Emily jumped in, eager to help. The cab driver's been asking my mom to work Sundays. She said she'd earn more money but didn't want to bother Daisy's mom. Mary's voice cut through my thoughts. What does Emily's mom look like? I don't know, I admitted. We've always called her Emily's mom, and Emily just calls her mom. Well, you'd better meet her soon and see if she's okay with this plan, Mary said. Then, with concern, she asked, Has Susan moved out yet? No clue, I said. We're at a restaurant right now. She was still packing when we left. While you're in town, pick up some new locks, Mary suggested. Call me if you need anything. Thanks, but I think we're okay for now, I replied, glancing at the girls. They grinned at each other, already solving problems I hadn't even considered. Mary didn't seem shocked or upset about Susan leaving. She and Susan had never been close. After ice cream, I decided it was time to meet Emily's mom, Linda, and explain the situation. If she was going to be involved in this arrangement, she needed to know what was going on. Leaving the girls in the car, I walked into the cab office. I'm James Carter, I told a cabbie behind the counter. I'm looking for Emily's mother. He gestured toward a door marked Ladies Only, with a sign that read Linda's office. The other cabbies barely looked up from the TV. After a short wait, Linda stepped out, and I was struck by her presence. She wasn't dressed fancy, just jeans and a blouse, but she carried herself like she belonged on a runway. Hey, James, is everything okay? She asked, her tone warm but concerned. Yeah, no, well maybe, I stammered. Emily's fine. I just needed to talk to you. We stepped outside, and she waved at the girls in the car before turning her attention back to me. What's up, James? You don't look so good. Susan left me, I blurted out. It felt strange to tell someone I'd never met something so personal. Her face softened. Oh no, I'm sorry to hear that. Does this mean there's a problem with the girls tonight? No, nothing like that, I assured her. I just wanted you to know I'll be watching them alone tonight. We've never met, and I thought you should hear it from me. Linda smiled kindly. Emily talks about you all the time. She thinks of you as a second dad. She even has a picture of you next to her bed. I blinked, surprised. A picture of me? Where did she get that? Daisy gave it to her, Linda said with a small laugh. Do you want me to take the night off and keep the girls? No, I said quickly. I just thought you should know. You're doing great, James, she said, placing a hand on mine. I'll come get Emily in the morning. You need to rest, I said. Maybe stop by tomorrow, and we'll talk about the future. The girls already have plenty of ideas. Linda nodded thoughtfully. We'll figure it out. Emily and Daisy are smart kids. They'll keep us in line. Her calm demeanor reassured me. She kissed the girls goodnight, telling them to behave, and we headed home. When we pulled into the driveway, an unfamiliar car was parked there. Susan stepped out, looking annoyed. Where have you been? I've been waiting for hours, she snapped, then added. I'm leaving. Her tone was clipped, almost robotic. My eyes were drawn to the Jaguar idling across the street. If that's who I think it is, tell him to move his car before I do, I said coldly. Susan gestured, and the car roared to life, pulling away. I parked where the Jaguar had been. You almost hit me, Susan complained. Oh, you're still here? I thought you'd left, I said, brushing past her. Aren't you taking your car? I asked, noticing her Nissan was empty while the Jaguar was packed. No point. Sell it, she replied. We're flying out Wednesday. She didn't wait for me to ask where to send the papers. Daniel's lawyer's address is on the kitchen table, she said, then turned to say goodbye to the girls. I left her to it and headed inside with Daisy and Emily. The girls, sensing my mood, exchanged high fives before settling in to watch TV. Later, I sent them to bed without a fuss. Daisy didn't even argue, which was a first. That night, I poured myself a couple of whiskeys and let the burn dull the chaos in my head. The next morning, the smell of frying bacon woke me. For a split second, I thought Susan was cooking. Then reality hit me like a punch to the gut. Her things were gone. Photos, toiletries, everything. Come on, Dad. Breakfast is getting cold. Daisy called. In the kitchen, the girls had laid out a spread. Fries, orange juice, and coffee. They even had tea and cornflakes for themselves. You girls outdid yourselves, I said, smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. Their beaming faces made it worth it. Mary, John, and their kids arrived just as we were finishing breakfast. The column in the kitchen was still broken, but the girls quickly offered coffee to Mary and John. It took some convincing to get the girls to step away from washing dishes and play with their cousins. Mary started tidying up in the kitchen while John and I sat down with our coffee. I filled him in on the whirlwind events of the previous day. They both assured me of their support, with John recommending a good divorce lawyer. Mary whipped up dinner using what we had in the fridge while I spent much of the day tending to my roses. Occasionally, I'd chat with them as I worked. Emily and Daisy helped me in the garden later that afternoon, and Emily, with her usual flair, quoted a line from a song. It's been a good year for the roses. The words stuck with me, given how much had changed in just a day. Around 4:30, a cab pulled up and Linda arrived. The girls let her in, and it was the first time we really got acquainted. Mary, Linda, and I discussed the girls' proposed plan for babysitting and school pickups. Linda confirmed she'd be working a Sunday night shift at her job, which would earn her more money. We finalized the arrangement with a few adjustments, including occasional help from Mary during school vacations. Linda called her boss right then, got approval for the extra shift, and looked to me for confirmation. I nodded, and we realized Emily would need her school clothes for the next day. Mary drove Linda and Emily home to collect them, with Daisy insisting on tagging along. When I carried Emily's bag inside, I asked Linda, "Do you drive?" "I do, but since Henry left, I can't afford a car," she replied. "How about using the Micra?" I offered, pointing to Susan's old car. "I can't take that," Linda said, surprised. "Why not?" "She told me to get rid of it, but I think you'll need it for school runs," I explained. "Are you sure?" she asked hesitantly. "Absolutely. Let's call the insurance company and add you as a driver," I insisted. "We'll sort out Susan's insurance later." Daisy chimed in, correcting me. "His name's Daniel, Dad." "Who cares? He's Daniel the rat to me," I replied sharply. "But he's funny and cute," she insisted, referencing a puppet from TV. I softened, smiling at her. "Okay, Daniel the rat it is." Over the next few weeks, we adapted to a new routine. Mary and John frequently visited on Saturdays, often bringing groceries or cooking lunch. I managed to keep the house in reasonable order, though housework wasn't exactly my strong suit. Mary never complained. Weekdays were quieter, sometimes lonely, but I adjusted. Fridays became the highlight of my week. Linda and the girls would be home, and Linda often cooked dinner before heading to her night shift. The hardest times were waking up alone or coming home to an empty house. Resentment towards Susan lingered, but I tried to push it aside for Daisy's sake. The divorce process was anything but simple. Susan and her new partner had left the country, traveling extensively, which made it difficult for her lawyer to reach her. I later discovered that Daniel's ex-wife was demanding child support and had frozen his UK accounts, complicating things further. Whenever Susan called Daisy, I would carefully pry for information about her location and pass it along to her attorney. I'm not sure if Daisy realized why I needed the details, but she provided them anyway. The difficulties Susan's lawyer faced worked in my favor. At a court hearing, her solicitor requested yet another adjournment, claiming he was waiting to hear from her. The judge, visibly frustrated, asked if I knew where she was. "I'm sorry, sir," I said, standing. "I haven't spoken to my wife since she left us." I refrained from mentioning her sporadic calls to Daisy, as the judge hadn't asked about them. The judge, noting Susan's unreasonable behavior, suggested I had grounds for desertion. He granted me full custody of Daisy and terminated Susan's parental rights with one condition. She had 21 days to appear in court if she wished to contest. Addressing me again, the judge remarked, "I'm surprised you haven't demanded child support from your wife." "John Lee, Your Honor, I don't see much chance of collecting it unless Marjorie returns to the country," I replied. The judge set a nominal £100 monthly support order, doubting I'd ever receive it, but wanting to establish a precedent. He advised my lawyer to investigate any remaining UK assets Susan might have. When I left the courtroom, I was a single man with full custody of Daisy and the rights to any property Susan left behind. I never bothered to track it down. One Monday, I noticed an international call on the log from the day before, likely from Susan. Neither Daisy nor Emily mentioned it, which was unusual, but I didn't press them. Susan's calls became less frequent over time, dwindling to nothing after Daniel's divorce was finalized. Somehow, Daisy and Emily seemed to know all the details, likely through school connections. About 4 months after the divorce was finalized, we were at a movie and having burgers when Emily dropped a bombshell. "Mom and I are moving soon because of a rent increase," she said casually. At first, I didn't think much of it. Only later did I realize it was part of a larger plan the girls had cooked up, to have Linda and Emily move in with us. At dinner one Friday, Daisy casually asked Linda if she'd found an apartment yet. Before Linda could respond, Emily exaggerated some horror stories about their search, clearly rehearsed for dramatic effect. Then Daisy suggested, "We've got a spare room. Why don't Emily and Aunt Linda move in with us?" The idea made sense. It would save Linda from struggling with rent and simplify our lives, cutting down on the back-and-forth logistics. I glanced at Linda to gauge her reaction, but she avoided my eyes. Not wanting to put her on the spot or dismiss the idea outright, I said cautiously, "Well, sometimes people might get the wrong idea about a man and a woman living together." Linda laughed. "Geez, James, you sound like a prude." "I'm just thinking about your reputation," I replied. "My reputation? That ship sailed ages ago," she said, smirking. "I already face rumors at my apartment because I'm gone every weekend and drive a new car. People think I'm up to something shady." "You're kidding," I said, stunned. "Nope. They even wrote to my landlord about it. I told them I work at a cab company, but the rumors don't stop." "You need to get out of there," I said firmly. "I know, but finding an affordable place has been impossible." "What about Daisy's idea?" she asked. "There's plenty of room here." She wasn't wrong. "Yeah, without the girls, this house feels like a morgue," I admitted. "And you're not a bad cook." "Should I take that as a compliment?" she teased. "Yes. The room's yours if you want it." The girls seem excited. "We'd have to discuss rent," Linda insisted. "No need. You handle the cooking. I hate housekeeping, and you're better at it anyway." "I'd feel better if I contributed to utilities or groceries," she said. "We'll sort that out later," I replied. "For now, are you sure you want to move in?" "If you're inviting us, then yes, we'd love to," she said, smiling. "Then it's settled. When do you want to move in?" "Our apartment's furnished," she began. "Don't worry about it," I assured her. "Most of my stuff can go, and the good pieces were sold long ago when Henry left." Linda and Emily moved in the following week. Most of their furniture was discarded, though a few pieces were stored in the garage. Her TV and music system ended up in the girls' room. With them in the house, the place felt alive again, and my mood noticeably improved. I stopped going for after-work drinks because I had bedtime stories to read to my 2 girls. Traveling for work ended after Susan left. My boss started sending others on trips, so I stayed home. Shortly after Linda moved in, I realized I was falling for her, though I kept it to myself. She was a year younger than me, always put together, and had a great sense of humor. She never complained about the girls or me, even tolerating my quirks. Deep down, I think I'd loved her from the moment we met. Mary was the first to notice. That Christmas, while we were setting the table, she asked, "Have you told Linda yet?" "Told her what?" I asked, playing dumb. "That you're in love with her, you fool," she said with a grin. "Don't be ridiculous, Mary." "James, I can read you like a book. You're more smitten with her than you were with Anna Brooks," she said, referring to my high school crush who'd broken my heart. "I'm attached to Linda, but I don't want to upset the balance here," I said. "James, she likes you just as much as you like her. You two act like teenagers in love," Mary said, rolling her eyes. "What do you mean?" "You avoid touching each other. Either you hate each other, which I doubt, or you're in love," she said pointedly. "Even the girls see it." "You think Linda likes me?" "Yes, James. Now stop being dense and tell her how you feel. You've charmed women before. Susan was different." "You're right. I never liked Susan," she said bluntly. "She had you wrapped around her finger. But Linda? She's different. She loves you, James. Go melt the ice." Before I could respond, Linda walked into the kitchen, and Mary and I quickly changed the subject. At dinner, Mary kept giving me knowing looks, sharing private smiles with the girls. Over the next few days, I tried to bring up my feelings with Linda several times, but always hesitated. On New Year's Eve, Linda was working, and Mary and John took the girls so I could attend a party with work friends. I didn't want to go but agreed reluctantly. The party dragged on until nearly 4 a.m., and I called a cab to get home. Linda picked up. "Hey, gorgeous, can you send someone to take me home?" I slurred. "James, are you drunk?" she asked, laughing. "Maybe," I said. I wasn't sure which phone to call. "Try not to throw up in the cab," she warned, still chuckling. Phil, the driver, picked me up and helped me into the car. As we drove, I noticed we weren't heading toward my house. "You're going the wrong way," I muttered. "You need someone to put you to bed," Phil replied. "And it won't be me. I think I know who'll volunteer." I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, Phil and Linda were helping me to the door. She clung to my arm, steadying me as we got inside. Phil helped me upstairs, and Linda began loosening my shirt to make me more comfortable. Intoxicated, I decided it was the perfect moment. As Linda leaned over me, I muttered, "You know, you're one hell of an attractive little Linda." "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, smirking. "That you're good enough to eat, and I'm hungry," I slurred with a smirk. Linda shook her head, amused. "How much have you had to drink?" she asked. "Not enough," I replied, still grinning. "But if I drank a little more, I might have the courage to tell you how much I love you." She paused, her expression softening. "I'll believe it when you say it's sober," she said gently. "Now get some sleep. We'll see how you feel in the morning." She smiled, stood to leave, but I grabbed her arm lightly, pulling her beside me. She didn't resist, and I drifted off, feeling her presence. The next morning, sunlight and a pounding headache greeted me. Disappointed, I noticed Linda wasn't beside me. "Here, drink this," I heard her voice behind me. "What is it?" I asked, squinting against the light. "It's not poison yet. I'd need life insurance first," she joked. "How do you know I wouldn't bump you off first?" I retorted, trying to sound clever. "You can't. You've got 2 daughters to take care of," she teased. "One of them's yours," I reminded her. "And they think of themselves as sisters now," she said, sitting on the bed. "You know, Daisy's been calling me Mom lately." "She has?" Linda sounded surprised. "Emily's been calling me Daddy for weeks now," I added. "Really?" she asked, genuinely astonished. "Yes. Even Mary noticed," I said. "She probably has her wedding outfit picked out already," I joked, despite my headache. Linda looked at me thoughtfully, holding the drink. "So, are you going to marry me or not?" I asked, breaking the silence. "You haven't asked me yet," she replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "I wanted to know your answer before I embarrassed myself." "Well," she said after a pause, "you wouldn't look foolish if you did ask." "But," I prompted. "But I have a confession," she admitted. "I'm not a widow. Henry isn't dead." I blinked, confused. "Wait, what?" "Henry was a bigamist. He was already married when he married me. Our marriage wasn't legal," she explained. So you're not a widow and never really married? It's just easier to tell people I'm a widow, she said quietly. In that case, I began. Would you do me the honor of? My words were cut off as we spent the next hour kissing and holding each other, forgetting about my hangover entirely. By the time John brought the girls home that afternoon, Linda and I were in the kitchen, trying to figure out how to tell them. It turned out we didn't have to say much. The girls hugged us both, clearly thrilled, with Daisy exclaiming, "Finally!" When John walked in, he grinned. "Congratulations. When's the big day?" We set a date for mid-February, planning a modest celebration. The girls wanted something grand, but we settled on a small event at the registry office, followed by a simple reception. With Linda's widow story, the registry office made things easier, avoiding public announcements. After the wedding, Linda submitted her resignation at the taxi company, choosing not to work night shifts anymore. I didn't mind. I hated sleeping alone anyway. We decided to sleep in separate bedrooms until the wedding to set a good example for the girls. But I developed a habit of coming home for long lunches once school started, making the wait for the wedding more bearable. Linda's coworkers sent her off with flowers and chocolates, and we spent her last Sunday shift at a local pub with several of the drivers and their spouses. The wedding day came quickly and went smoothly. The girls were perfect bridesmaids, and Linda looked stunning. We spent one night in a honeymoon suite while Mary and John took the girls home, planning to spend the summer traveling as a family. That first year, we drove through Florida, the Caribbean, and Southern California, exploring and bonding as a new family. A week or two after the wedding, I noticed Linda seemed upset. After the girls went to bed, she sat me down. "Does Emily know Henry isn't dead?" she asked. I froze. How could she know? We've never discussed it around them. She must have figured it out. The girls keep hiding pictures of Marjorie and Henry in their drawers. When I asked why, Emily said, "They don't need us. We don't want to look at them." It hit me that Emily must have known her father hadn't died in a traffic accident, but had left. Linda decided not to explain further, sparing Emily the harsh truth about her father's abandonment. Surprisingly, Emily didn't seem bothered, and the shared experiences brought her and Daisy closer. Linda proved to be an incredible wife and mother. She was patient, kind, and endlessly supportive, even when things got hectic. She had a way of diffusing tension with her humor, often teasing me playfully about my quirks. Despite everything that had happened, we built something beautiful together. Our nights were often tiring but always filled with love and laughter. By early summer, Marjorie's calls to Daisy had almost completely stopped. Daisy, growing angrier at her mother, became more persistent when Marjorie did call, often referring to Linda as new mommy during their conversations. Linda and I had to step in, reminding Daisy to be respectful, even when hurt. In response, Daisy switched tactics, casually talking about our family activities and referring to Linda as Daddy's wife and Emily as my sister. We discussed Daisy's behavior and realized we couldn't dictate all the words and phrases to forbid. Ultimately, we decided Marjorie would have to live with the consequences of her actions. Before our summer vacation ended, the girls started leaving printouts of adoption procedures around the house, hinting at what they wanted. Linda to adopt Daisy, and me to adopt Emily. They even found forms to change Emily's last name to Carter. After careful thought, Linda and I decided to move forward with the adoptions. Legally, the process was tricky because Emily's father, though absent, still had parental rights. We hired the same attorney who had handled my divorce to assist. It took over a year to terminate Henry's parental rights and finalize the adoptions, coincidentally with the same judge who had granted my divorce. At the end of it, we were officially the Carters, Linda and I, with our daughters, Daisy and Emily. We considered having more children but decided against it. Instead, we focused on giving the girls the best life we could. I received a promotion that year, with a bigger salary and less travel. Our summer vacations became a cherished tradition. In our second year, we explored Europe, the third year, India and Sri Lanka, the fourth, Australia and New Zealand. By the fifth summer, the girls, now 14, were documenting our travels with video cameras, and their detailed planning rivaled my own. About 2 years after our marriage, Marjorie began sending Christmas cards. They arrived without a return address but bore Canadian stamps, hinting she and Daniel had settled there. Her cards were sparse, and she hadn't called Daisy in years, so we rarely discussed her. Our summer plans that year took us westward, starting with Winnipeg, where we explored historic sites. From Manitoba, we drove west to Saskatchewan, then south through the Dakotas, Nebraska, and Kansas, before heading to Colorado and Wyoming. We stayed at a dude ranch for a few days, where I discovered my strong preference for English saddles over Western ones. The idea of staying on a horse, or motorcycle, with a spinning rear wheel was never appealing to me. From Wyoming, we traveled to Montana, stopping in a small town I'd always wanted to visit after reading about it in a Western. We checked into a motel and went to a nearby diner for dinner. The place was packed, noisy with chatter and clinking silverware, until a loud crash silenced the room. A waitress had dropped her tray, and everyone turned to look. To my shock, I recognized her immediately. She stood frozen, staring back at me. Linda also recognized her and leaned in to reassure the girls. "Eat your dinner, Emily, Daisy. There's nothing to worry about." We spoke almost in unison, each addressing our own adopted daughter. Despite 5 years as a family, we still instinctively scolded our original children first. Daisy glanced toward the waitress, muttered, "So be it," and went back to her meal. Emily lingered a moment longer, then smiled at me, looked at her mother, and resumed eating. The other diners, sensing the tension, stared, but we ignored them. As we left the diner, Linda whispered, "I guess the grass wasn't as green as it looked." "What do you mean?" I asked. "If she's working here, she's probably no longer with Daniel. One of them likely cheated." "Once a cheater, always a cheater," I replied. "She didn't cheat on you, James. She dumped you and Daisy." "Leaving her daughter is the same as cheating in my book," I said sharply. "She couldn't stay faithful to her family." "Does it matter now?" Linda asked. "Only if she tries to cause trouble." "Daisy's been through enough," I said firmly. "She won't. Daisy handled seeing her better than you did," Linda teased. "Don't start, Linda. I know what the girls did, and I'm grateful for their clever little schemes. I just wonder how far they planned things in advance," I said, more amused than upset. "What do you mean?" she asked, curious. "Nothing major. Just that sometimes it feels like they've had a master plan all along. Don't overthink it. They've got good instincts. We're lucky, that's all," Linda said, squeezing my hand. We reached the car, and I unlocked it with the remote, thinking about how far we'd come as a family. Whatever the girls' plans had been, they worked. Our lives were richer and happier than I could have imagined. The kids hopped into the back seat, laughing and chatting, while I opened the front passenger door for Linda. Instead of getting in, she turned to me, wrapping her arms around my neck and kissing me deeply. From the back seat came a mix of groans and giggles, followed by teasing remarks like, "Not in public," and "Save it for your room." Their playful commentary didn't bother us. It was part of the dynamic we'd grown to love. The girls' maturity always impressed me, forged from the hardships they'd faced. Emily had lost her father when she was 6, and Daisy had been abandoned by her mother at 8. Both girls had handled those experiences with strength and grace, but moments like these reminded me they were still kids at heart. Linda, sensing the humor in their teasing, whispered against my ear, "We have an audience." I glanced over her shoulder and froze. Standing in the doorway of the diner's kitchen was Marjorie, watching us with an expression I couldn't read. Linda leaned back and said quietly, "I think Daisy should go see her." I sighed but nodded. "Yeah, I don't think we have a choice." Linda turned to Daisy, who was already watching us warily. "Your mom is here," Linda said gently. "I think you should talk to her." "Do I have to?" Daisy asked, her tone a mix of reluctance and defiance. "She's still your mother," Linda replied softly. "Someday, you might regret not taking this chance." Daisy frowned but didn't argue. She climbed out of the car with an exaggerated sigh, muttering, "Fine." She shot me one last pleading look, but I nodded for her to go. Slowly, she walked toward Marjorie, her steps hesitant and her head held high. She stopped several feet away, crossing her arms as if to create a barrier between them. From the car, we couldn't hear what was being said, but it quickly became clear that Daisy was doing most of the talking. Whenever Marjorie took a step forward, Daisy retreated, her body language screaming discomfort. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I fought the urge to intervene. "This isn't going well," Linda murmured. "No," I agreed. "It's not." After what felt like an eternity, Daisy turned and bolted back to the car, tears streaking her cheeks. She jumped in, slammed the door, and fastened her seatbelt without a word. By the time I glanced back at the diner, Marjorie had disappeared from the doorway. I wanted to drive away immediately, but Linda wasn't finished. She was already halfway to the diner before I could say anything. Linda returned about 10 minutes later, her expression unreadable. She slid into the passenger seat and gave me a look that said, "Not now." I got the message, started the car, and we drove off in silence. The girls seemed to pick up on the tension and stayed quiet. After lunch, we decided to take a walk along the river path and visit the waterfalls the town was named after. Though the hydroelectric dams had diminished their original splendor, the falls were still beautiful. As usual, the girls ran ahead, leaving Linda and me some space to talk. "So," I began hesitantly, "what did she say?" "She confirmed what we suspected," Linda said. "Daniel left her 2 years ago for a waitress here in town. He dumped her with the motel bill and disappeared. She ended up working at the motel's restaurant to pay it off." "Why didn't she just go back to the UK?" I asked. "She didn't have the money," Linda replied with a shrug. "Now she shares a room with another woman who works at the restaurant. By day, she waits tables. By night, she bartends. She's stuck, James." I shook my head, my tone bitter. What a life. Just the glamorous future she imagined, I'm sure. "Don't be cruel," Linda said gently. "Marjorie made her choices, and now she's living with the consequences. And what am I supposed to say to her? That I forgive her? That all is forgiven because she's had a tough time?" I asked, my frustration bubbling up. "You don't have to forgive her, James," Linda said firmly. "But you need closure. Whether you like it or not, she's Daisy's mother. She wants to apologize, but it's clear Daisy isn't ready for that yet. Though you're the adult, you need to hear her out." I sighed heavily. "And you're okay with all this? After everything Henry did to you?" Linda gave me a small, sad smile. "What's the point of holding on to hate? Henry hurt me and every other woman he tricked into marrying him. I wasted so much time being angry at him, but one day, sitting in a police station waiting room with his other wives, I realized we were all in the same boat. We weren't to blame, so we became friends instead. I refused to waste my life hating Henry. I have more important people to focus on now, you and the girls." Her words softened something in me. She took my hand and added, "Besides, if Marjorie hadn't run off, where would we be now?" I smiled despite myself. Good point. At 6, I waited in the restaurant parking lot for Marjorie to finish her shift. She emerged with another woman, who gave me a once-over before walking away. Marjorie hesitated before approaching, looking nothing like the confident, self-assured woman I'd known years ago. She seemed nervous, her eyes darting everywhere but mine. Yet, even now, there was a hint of the woman I'd once loved, though the years had taken their toll. "Hi, James. Thanks for coming," Marjorie greeted me, her voice unusually tentative. Her once confident demeanor was gone, replaced by an air of caution. "The bar's quiet now. Why don't we go there and talk?" I didn't respond verbally, just gestured for her to lead the way. Following her into the bar, I noticed the dark-haired woman from earlier talking to the bartender as we entered. It was clear we were expected. Several booths were conspicuously empty, leaving only one at the back for privacy. The dark-haired woman approached, setting 2 beers on the table before saying something to Marjorie in Spanish. Marjorie nodded in response, and I wondered how much she'd picked up of the language during her time here. "So, you wanted to see me?" I began, reminding her that this meeting wasn't my idea. "What do you want?" Marjorie hesitated, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry, James." I leaned back, surprised by her words. "Sorry? For what exactly?" My voice was sharp, but not intentionally. "Honestly, Marjorie, you did me a favor." Her eyes flickered with bitterness. "Of course I did. Linda got the better end of the deal, didn't she?" she snapped, her tone defensive. I sighed, trying to keep my temper in check. It wasn't about Linda latching onto me, Marjorie. If anything, it was the other way around. The moment I met her, I knew things were different. If I'd met Linda before you left, my voice trailed off. The truth was, I didn't know how that sentence should end. Maybe I'd have walked away from Marjorie. Maybe not. My sense of duty wouldn't have allowed me to abandon our family, not like she had. What happened to Loverboy? I asked, shifting the focus. What happened to all the money he supposedly had? Marjorie's bitter laugh cut through the air. Daniel's money? What a joke. He left his wife and kids penniless. She seized every one of his accounts, and they were mostly filled with stolen money. He was a crook, James. He's wanted all over the place. I wouldn't be surprised if that's why he left me. When things got too hot, he bailed. And you? What about the FBI? Weren't they after you too? She nodded, her gaze dropping. Pretty much. I got involved in some of his scams without realizing what I was doing. By the time my picture was in the papers, it was too late. We had to flee Argentina. He crossed into Canada with one of the waitresses from here, leaving me to deal with the fallout. So, how are you not in prison? I made a deal, she admitted. I agreed to testify against him if they catch him. They gave me probation, 2 years for aiding a fugitive. I can't leave the country until he's caught, and I have to report to the authorities weekly. I shook my head in disbelief. And your debts? Are you still drowning in them? Not as much anymore. I signed over almost everything. My car, Daniel's rental, anything of value. I've paid off most of it but still owe a few $1,000s, she admitted, her voice trailing off when I pulled out my checkbook. No, James. I can't, Marjorie protested, her hands raised as if to stop me. For once in your life, do as you're told, I said firmly. I'll write this for £5,000, roughly $10,000. It should clear your debts and give you something to lean on if you need it. If you decide to go back to the UK after they catch Daniel, Linda and I will help you get settled. She stared at me, stunned. Why would you do this? Because, Marjorie, I said, my voice softening, this isn't about you. It's about Daisy. But don't mistake this kindness as permission to interfere in our lives. You know the court stripped you of all parental rights to Daisy, right? She told me that this morning, Marjorie said quietly, but I realized it wasn't about that when Linda came into the kitchen. Marjorie, I said, my voice firmer, this was all a long time ago. I'm just glad you're safe now. But understand this, Daisy and I have moved on. Linda and I will do our best to make sure Daisy keeps in touch with you, but you're no longer part of her life. Her voice wavered as she replied, that's more than I deserve. I don't even deserve this check. Take it, I insisted. It'll ease my conscience if nothing else. And tomorrow morning, we'll come by the diner for breakfast. Maybe Daisy will be willing to speak to you more calmly. Marjorie nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I don't deserve your kindness, James. It's not about you deserving it, Marjorie, I said, standing up. You're Daisy's mother. That's the only reason I'm here. Without another word, I turned and walked away. When I reached Linda and the girls, they were waiting for me, their faces tense with curiosity. I pulled Linda aside, briefly explaining the conversation and the money I had given Marjorie. She doesn't deserve you, Linda said, shaking her head when I mentioned the check. No, I agreed, but it's not about her. Linda smiled faintly, placing a hand on my cheek. That's why I love you, James. That's pretty much what she said, I told Linda, leaning in to kiss her. She smiled against my lips, her warmth filling the moment. Well, then, thank you, she replied with a quiet chuckle, her way of acknowledging the effort I'd made. Later, I pulled Daisy aside, intending to have the classic you only have one birth mother conversation. Before I could begin, she interrupted, telling me that Linda and Emily had already talked to her about it. That derailed my planned speech. Instead, she surprised me by saying she talked to her mother the next morning but added, I'm not doing it alone. Emily, or you have to be there. Why? I asked, caught off guard. Because someone was always with me during the funeral, she said curtly. The comment hit me like a punch, leaving me unsure how to respond. Rather than push her further, I let it go. She'd faced this moment in her own way. The next morning, Marjorie, Daisy, and Emily sat at a table nearby in the diner. They talked for a long time, their heads close together, and for the most part, they were smiling. I assumed Marjorie's co-workers were covering for her shift, as she had work to do, but no one interrupted them. Linda and I only overheard snippets of their conversation, mostly about the roses growing in our garden, which both girls described with enthusiasm. When it was time to leave, Marjorie walked out with us. She kissed both girls goodbye and then turned to Linda and me. "These two are very lucky," she said, her voice wavering. "They have the best mom and dad in the world." The sincerity in her words caught me off guard. Before I could respond, she turned and hurried back to the restaurant, disappearing through the door. I could only assume she was crying. As we drove away, the girls were unusually quiet, but from the way they were looking in the rearview mirror, it was clear they weren't looking back at the town, or Marjorie, with any sense of longing. They seemed at peace, content to leave that chapter behind. After we returned home, Linda made a habit of writing to Marjorie regularly, keeping her updated. While we never found out if the FBI tracked Daniel down, less than a year later, we received word that Marjorie was getting married, to her probation officer, of all people. His name was Tom, though the girls thought Buster suited him better. We received an invitation to the wedding, but decided as a family to decline. Even so, I felt compelled to attend, though I couldn't fully explain why. Tom turned out to be a decent man, the kind you'd hope Marjorie might finally settle down with. He picked me up from the airport, introduced me to his friends and family, and spoke highly of Marjorie. She had been open with him from the start, admitting her mistakes and expressing deep regret for her past actions. I learned that Tom had orchestrated the Christmas cards we'd received from various Canadian cities, enlisting trucker friends to send them so we wouldn't learn Marjorie's true circumstances. Walking Marjorie down the aisle felt surreal, a strange, full-circle moment. It wasn't easy, but it felt like closing a chapter that had loomed over me for too long. When I returned home, I didn't tell the girls where I'd been. Knowing them, they probably figured it out anyway. Those two had always been one step ahead of me. Over the years, we learned Marjorie had 2 sons with Tom. We never met them in person, but the girls received pictures occasionally, and I suspected they stayed in touch as the boys grew older. Daisy and Emily rarely mentioned Marjorie to me, and I didn't pry. It felt like an unspoken understanding. We all had moved on, but threads of the past remained. Remarkably, Daisy and Emily ended up marrying brothers, a coincidence I couldn't help but find amusing. The girls remained inseparable, even as adults, and played an undeniable role in shaping their shared lives. When those two schemed together, they were unstoppable, a trait that had persisted since childhood. Both had 2 children of their own, born suspiciously close in timing and location, almost as if coordinated. Linda and I often joked about their synchronicity, but watching our grandchildren grow up into many versions of their mothers brought us immense joy. Last year, I retired from my role as managing director, and Linda and I embarked on an 8-month round-the-world trip. We've been pondering whether to settle down somewhere new, but the pull of our daughters and their families back home is strong. The house remains ours. Emily and Daisy wouldn't let us sell it because of the garden. They visit often, tending to the roses we planted years ago. It seems those roses have become more than just flowers. They symbolize the family we built together. This morning, while checking my email, I received a picture of the garden with the caption, "It's been a good year for roses." It made me smile. Life moves on, as it always does, but some things, like love, family, and the bonds we've created, stay with you forever.